Kia ora koutou. Ena mana, ena reo, e rau rangatira mā. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Jill Ralston, aho. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Koitu webinar today. I'm Jill Ralston, the Communications Manager at Koitu, the Centre for Informed Futures. Today, we'll be discussing our latest paper, If Not Journalists, Then Who? It's a position paper on New Zealand's news media, and it paints a rather dire picture of an industry facing existential threats. And we go along to suggest some sweeping changes to deal with the wide impacts of digital transformation and alarmingly low levels of trust in news. Before we get started, I'm going to give you some context about Koitu and the report. I'll outline the format for today and I'll share some housekeeping. But first of all, allow me to introduce you to Gavin and Anne. Dr Gavin Ellis is the report author. He's an honorary research fellow here at Koitu, and he's written 2 books on the state of journalism, Trust, Ownership and the Future of News, and Complacent Nation. He's a former University of Auckland lecturer and newspaper editor. Dr Anne Bardsley is our deputy director and leads our work on democratic innovation and risk. Now, to introduce Koitu. We are an independent and non-partisan think tank and research centre. We're hosted at Waipapa Taumata Road, the University of Auckland, and our work addresses long-term issues challenging our future. It spans 4 main themes: future society, human potential, navigating change, and informing policy. Our name, Koitu, was gifted to us by Ngāti Whātua Ōreki. Colloquially, it means sharp as. It also refers to the sharp point of a spear. And like our namesake, Koitu aims to get to the heart of long-term issues affecting Aotearoa. So back to the paper. Gavin started this media project late last year, and he's developed the paper following consultation with media leaders. He's also worked with Professor John Burrows, Peter Bale, William Earle, and Whakaata Māori. Today, Gavin will cover key suggestions from the paper, including a voluntary merger of news regulators, reorganising the Broadcasting Commission, amendments to digital platforms levy for media compensation, potential review of outdated media-related legislation, and recommendations for editorial practices and journalistic transparency. In terms of the format, Gavin will talk now for about 15 minutes about the report, and we'll then discuss with him about the importance of media for democracy, and then we'll open it up to everybody for Q&A. In terms of housekeeping, we're running this as a Zoom meeting, so please put your microphone on mute and keep your camera turned off. You can ask questions in the chat and I'll share them with Anne and Gavin as we go along. The webinar is being recorded. The paper we're discussing is available online on our website, which is informedfutures.org, and Anne will put a link to that in the chat. And so now, Gavin, I'd like to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Jill. Kia ora, everybody. I want to start by putting some context around the report and why it's been written. And I have to say that I must thank my colleagues and contributors who provided sections for that report, and of course all of the people at Koitu who stopped me from making too many mistakes and kept me on the straight and narrow, and made very, very valuable contributions in their own right. This is not scaremongering. This report really talks about a perfect storm. It's a perfect storm that is facing not only us, but other countries as well. Now, a perfect storm might seem to be a bit of an overworked term, but it really is appropriate in this context because it refers to 3 weather systems that converge and create the mother of all weather events. And that's what we're seeing happening here. The first weather system is the effect of transnational digital platforms on the revenue that our media previously enjoyed and no longer enjoy. Jill, can you put up the first slide? There is no better way of demonstrating this than to show it graphically. The red line in the ascendancy, I'm sure you need no prompting on. That is the revenue that is going offshore to digital platforms. Our traditional media, newspapers, in particular have really since the turn of the new century, well, 2005 anyway, been in a almost straight line decline. Our other media, television in particular, has been flatlining and recently has undergone some serious cutbacks as well. So you can see the trend is all wrong. The money is going offshore. The ability of our media to sustain their journalism is declining year on year. So that's the first weather system. The second weather system, we can get rid of that one now, thank you, Jill. The second weather system is the changing pattern of audience behaviour. The move away from linear scheduled programming, news avoidance, and a reliance on social media for information. The third weather system are the structures and laws in this country that are unfit for purpose. They are frankly relics of the past that don't help us any longer. So that's the background to where we sit. If nothing is done, the only variable will be time. How long will it take for this mother of all storms to break over our heads? We're not, as I said, on our own. The New Yorker magazine recently published an article about an existential threat to journalism. Now, if it's happening in America, it's happening elsewhere as well, and it certainly is potentially going to happen here unless we change something. The paper, I think, if it makes one point more strongly than others, it is the fact that we can't tinker with this. We can't do a little bit here and do a little bit there. Before we started the project, we were concerned that in the lead up to the election, no political party had a comprehensive policy for dealing with this looming media crisis. So we brought together media leaders in a workshop, and their concerns have informed much of the work that we've done. We've subsequently spoken to many of them to tease out their concerns and to arrive at potential solutions for them. Now, this is not just a problem for government. Although I mentioned government policy, this is a broadly based issue that the media themselves have to address aspects of it, government have to address aspects of it, and the public have to address aspects of it. It's clear that the media themselves need to rethink the way they do their journalism. Successive trust reports have highlighted a feeling that people can no longer differentiate between news and opinion. And we've seen recently an example of that in polling. They also, as part of a much broader decline in trust in institutions, they have significantly less trust in media than they did, say, 5 years ago. And it's declining very fast. Similarly with news avoidance. So the media themselves have to say, well, let's not take one trust study, but let's look at them across the board. Let's have a longitudinal look at it, and it's telling us that we're not doing everything right. So what are they doing wrong? How do they fix it? That's for them. That's for them. As far as government goes, government really needs to address this issue of the broken market, the disparity in revenue, and those platforms that are taking billions of dollars out of this country every year are doing it off the back of news media. Now, not directly all the time, but there are derivatives of news media that are feeding things like social media, search engines, increasingly AI generation, and so on. So they're getting money, they're making the money without paying for any of the feedstock that goes into it. That has to change. We have suggested the imposition of a levy. The basis of that is that we don't believe that the fair bargaining bill that's before Parliament at the moment is going to work, because in other jurisdictions it's being ignored where they have similar law. The levy, which we say could be part of the current digital services tax bill that's before Parliament, is not new. We're not the first to do it. There are about 18 countries in the world that already have some form of digital services tax, and many more are considering it. Canada currently is considering it, for example. So we think that the government can and must provide a pool of money from that source that will go back to preserve and sustain public interest journalism in this country, or as we call it, democratically significant journalism. Now, that must be new money. It is not a replacement for the money the state currently provides for various media entities. It's got to be new money, and it must not be distributed by government. It has to have its own distribution system, which leads us on to the next major plank of the report, which is the creation of an umbrella organisation, an administrative organisation. This is not Ofcom in the Southern Hemisphere. We're saying that there needs to be an information commission born out of the current Broadcasting Commission that provides the administrative services for a range of totally independent regulatory and fund distributing bodies. Jill, can you bring up the second slide there? And this is what it would look like. Now, I emphasize that each of those, well, certainly the oversight and funding pillars must be demonstrably independent of government, both in their representation and in their adjudication and distribution. The research and advocacy function is one that is really an amalgam of all the other functions as well. But certainly oversight and funding must be free of government influence of any sort in order to restore trust in media and trust in government, for that matter. So those are the principal planks that we have. There also needs to be immediate work done on distribution systems. We will see within the next 3 years a move away from broadcast television to streaming. I think that 3 will be streaming by the end of next year, and TV3, I think, TVNZ within 3 years. So the effect on our transmission system is very real. It has flow-on effects for radio. It has flow-on effects for Maori television, and so on. So there needs to be urgent work done on that as well. There is a lot to be done. There are about 17 or 18 different acts of Parliament that are no longer fit for purpose. There needs to be coordinated reform across the board on all of those issues. So much to be done, and we need a coordinated effort for that to happen. So I'll leave it there, Jill, and hand over to Anne.
Thanks, Gavin. That description of the perfect storm does leave us with a lot of food for thought. And I think from perspective of COI 2, I would always like to bring this back to, why is it necessary? Because there are voices out there saying journalists, media has done this to themselves. We don't need it anyway. I feel a lack of recognition of the importance of media and journalism to democracy, and we're missing that. I mean, obviously, a healthy, functioning democracy is predicated on an electorate making informed choices, and this rests also then on the quality of the information that they receive. So it's a critical factor, that access to information being important for at least two reasons: that it ensures that citizens do make responsible and informed choices rather than acting out of a lack of knowledge, top of the head, what they're hearing in an echo chamber, or based on misinformation, and also that checking function on government, ensuring that elected representatives do uphold their oaths. So it's that. You mentioned all of the factors that are coming to create a perfect storm for journalism and media, and bringing us back to that reminder of why this is so important that we get it right. And one thing that is in the report a bit, but you haven't touched on yet, is about that information ecosystem and journalism being a conduit for the information, which needs to be pluralistic. And the situation where we're starting to see news deserts, where local media is in decline, and creating some news deserts where local information just is not available at all. Did you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah. Yes, that's right. It was something of a paradox that the day that the report was published was the day that the Wairoa Star announced that it was ceasing publication. Now, there's a move to try and rescue it. Whether that will be successful remains to be seen. Before that, of course, we had the Kapiti Observer, long-time provider of local news on the coast, stopping publication. These won't be the last. They will not be the last. We already have significant news deserts in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Australia. It's only a matter of time before they become more noticeable here. I think probably we already have news deserts, but they're just not quite as apparent as they might be. But how many people no longer know about what's happening locally? I suspect many of them are. When they grow in size, if we lost a regional newspaper, for example, or a regional radio station, then it will become quite apparent.
Yeah, thanks. So do you think that those local areas are recognizing their lack of information locally? People now consuming news in a different way may not even realize what they're missing. I wonder, and what will the public actually support? So it's not like you said. There's roles for the media itself to reestablish trust, not by creating democratically significant journalism, but the government in helping to support that, but also the public in recognizing the importance of journalism as a public good. What evidence have we, or do you have any comments on what the public's role there is, and how that's being affected by this storm?
I think that, to your first point about do we know that, or do people know that their local news has gone? When there's been a closure, there may be some efforts to replace it with online newsletters or the like, but that's not a substitute for something that the local council is going to sit up and take notice of. One of the things about news media is that they have a certain. I'm a child of the Cold War, so I use these sort of analogies, but they have throw weight. You know, in other words, the power of a ballistic missile to deliver a warhead. A newspaper or a local news outlet, whatever the way it's delivered, has throw weight with its local council. A regional newspaper has throw weight with its electorates. And our largest media operators have throw weight nationally. And at that time, the aggregation of all of that is that we have a critical mass, going back to another Cold War analogy. You know, a critical mass is the smallest amount of fissile material that it takes to create a sustained nuclear reaction. If you don't have enough journalists and you don't have enough outlets at every level, you know, from local community level right up to national level, if you don't have a critical mass to provide that, then your ability to do the sort of democratically significant functions that you were talking about diminish and ultimately die. And that's the danger, that if we don't do something to sustain our journalism, we lose critical mass, we lose throw weight.
I'm going to take some of the questions from the chat. We've got one from Peter Fowler. What feedback have you had from government and political parties on your report? Do they support any recommendations, and how confident are you they are treating this as a matter of urgency?
I think it's probably a little early yet. The report was only released last Wednesday, and governments tend not to react quite that quickly. I do know that there has been significant interest in the report, both politically and within the public service, and it was eagerly awaited. We're still waiting to get their feedback, and also don't forget that Paul Goldsmith, who now has responsibility for virtually all of these areas that we're talking about, has been overseas in Europe. So I think it'll probably await his return before we start to see reaction. I think that it played a part in a move by Willie Jackson to set up a summit at Parliament on the state of the media and what needs to be done. I'm not quite sure if or when that's going to happen, but I know that he has signalled a desire for that to take place and for it to be bipartisan.
We've got a question on the trust issue, which of course is critical, from Heather. What do you know about cultural or migrant differences regarding ethics in journalism and trust in our New Zealand media? Do you have...
As far as the ethics go, all news media who are subject to regulation either by the Broadcasting Standards Authority or by the Media Council sign up to a common set of ethical standards. So I think within the profession, if you like, the professional field of journalism, they are bound by common values. And if they transgress those, then they can be subject to a complaint to either of those bodies. Sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Sorry, it was about whether there were differences culturally or migrant communities. Do you know of differences in levels of trust?
Look, I'm not aware of whether the JMAD survey from Auckland University of Technology drills down to that level of detail. However, if you look at the latest trust report from JMAD on their website, the methodology is in there. I didn't, from memory, discern breakdown along ethnic or cultural lines. I can imagine that migrants may have a different attitude depending on where they came from and the level of freedom that the media in their home country, or their country of origin rather, may have had, and that would obviously influence levels of trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Penny also has a question about trust. She's asking why we think this is happening in particular, if it's being perpetuated by the same voices that are perpetuating fake news themselves online. I mean, from my perspective, I would say obviously that's a part of it, that we there is there's a storm within the, what's underpinning trust. It's the financial model that has coerced media to veer towards clickbait and what they think is of interest to the public versus what is of the public interest. The technological problems that are situation that and social media that's driving people to consume in different ways, and they are then subject to voices in an echo chamber, lots of which are telling them not to trust the media. So the media is itself probably contributing to a decline in trust in how they cover in what they're producing. It's government voices too, you have to say, will sometimes say that, we can't trust the media. Those that are supposed to be holding them to account are then, put down. And then social media, disinformation, echo chambers are just accentuating that. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Gavin?
I'd agree with that. It is a very complex environment with multiple factors causing it. But there is undoubtedly a concerted effort to undermine the media as well. And that was, I think, exemplified in the extraordinarily successful disinformation campaign around the Public Interest Journalism Fund, saying that it was a form of bribery. Utter nonsense. Now, I was involved in various aspects of that fund, and I can assure you, hand on heart, nobody was bribed and nobody would accept a bribe. And yet, that disinformation campaign was so successful that even people who should know better started mouthing that mantra. And I found that deeply disturbing and disheartening. It shows that we don't value our journalism anywhere near as much as we need to, but by God, we'll rue it when it's gone.
We have a question from Sumina. Your proposal for a new independent regulator has some overlap with what was proposed by DIA and the Safer Online Services and Online Platforms consultation. Do you have any insight on what the next steps are with that DIA work, especially now there is a new government in charge?
Yeah, look, I think that it needs to be taken into this overall restructuring of regulation. I have some concerns about some of the rhetoric surrounding the proposals. I think that while none of us want to see the proliferation of harmful speech, we also need to ensure that that doesn't become a weapon in the hands of those who would restrict legitimate speech. So there's a fine balance there, and ultimately the only way that can be satisfied is by having the regulatory means to demonstrably independently evaluate along lines that have been formulated and publicly accepted. In other words, It's all within guidelines, and it's all done independent of any form of influence. Now, that influence may be political. It could be from the media themselves. It needs to be independent of both. It needs to be independent of the production industry. In other words, there has to be, if you like, a public voice on what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. I go back to a famous essay by Stanley Fish. There's no such thing as free speech, and it's a good thing too, where he says that we operate within boundaries that society itself sets. This is acceptable, this is unacceptable. Now, we need to have systems that reflect that social setting of boundaries, not political or industry setting of boundaries.
I think that's a really interesting point. Sorry, go ahead, Jill.
I was just going to say, there's an interesting question in here around from Hazel. I'm sort of building on the need for looking at regulatory measures. And she asks, is there a model in another country of the sort of the Information Commission and how you envisage it? And how do you think it would work?
Not the Information Commission itself, because I see that as in a pretty novel way as an administrative umbrella, but not having control of the functions within it. So it's something of a novelty, if you like. What I do not want to see under any circumstances is the creation of a monstrous beast like Ofcom in the United Kingdom, which is the regulator of everything. That's not what we're looking for. We need to have, first of all, buy-in from members of the Media Council. That's an independent, voluntary body. You can't just lump it in with the BSA or a reincarnation of the BSA without their agreement. The press have always functioned independent of government and government regulation. We must not undermine that under any circumstances. So this entity that we're creating has to embody, as I think I said in the paper, 300 years of heritage. It's got to be mindful of what went before and why we have freedom of the media and why it's important that we maintain that. The other pillar that I think we also need to pay some attention to is that funding pillar, because if we brought the production industry into that as well, say we had a levy that was applied to the streaming services, and that money went to our production industry, we have to have ways of equitably distributing that money too, in ways that contribute to not only the survival of our production industries, but its growth in every sense of the word.
There's a question here that might be worthwhile for both of you, both Anne, with your experience with risk, and Gavin, I'd also like you to consider it. It's from Matty Wall. She says, looking at the current media situation through a climate change or risk management lens, what effect will there be on emergency management situations on having no linear TV service?
Want me to start off there?
Yeah, Gavin, you can start with that one. Yeah.
It's not so much the television service that we need to worry about there, but the radio service. Because if we lose the AM network, and that's a possibility, the recent storms in Hawke's Bay showed how valuable that AM network and RNZ's, not only RNZ, but the emergency radio services that were employed there. It's more a problem, I think, for radio, but I think setting aside the emergency services, where we do have an issue is disenfranchisement. If you take away free to air broadcasting, Are we denying people who can't afford streaming services access to material? And that free access is a key factor in how we go forward. We must not disenfranchise anybody, whether it be by economic disenfranchisement or age disenfranchisement.
Back to journalism and information being a public good, and we need to be able to support everyone having access to it and to a pluralistic media. There's a question from Alex Bonham about that there seems to be a focus on media exposing politicians in public bodies, and there's a need for that where there's been crime or corruption. But more importantly, issues, events, decisions, and initiatives need to be reported in a measured way. It sometimes feels that the tone of political reporting is that democracy and all politicians are not to be trusted, and that's a problem. How do you tackle that? So, yes, again, there's the two-way street of politicians are saying that media can't be trusted, and sometimes the way that government decision-making is being reported would also go the other way for media portraying politicians as being untrustworthy.
Yeah, I think also it demonstrates that conflation of news and opinion, where the way that things are reported is an amalgam of reporting the facts and what the reporter thinks about it. Now, that needs to be separated. Of course, there's room for opinion. It's very valuable, but we need to separate the two, because if we do separate the two, the reportage becomes more measured. If you take comment out of it, the reporting almost by definition becomes a more measured commodity. And I think it's important. And it's not only the criticism of politicians or whoever, but people also want to know simply what's happening, what's going on. I want to know when they're going to dig up the intersection that I go through most days of the week. That would be helpful to me. So helpful information is just as important as holding power to account.
Gavin, we've got a question here from Greg. He's raising sort of Julian Assange. Why didn't New Zealand media become advocates for Julian Assange's freedom for doing journalism through the WikiLeaks platform?
I can't answer that. It postdates my period where I had any ability to control it. I simply don't know. They have reported it, of course. Maybe they felt that adding their voice wasn't needed because there were already many voices there. It's hard to say. I don't know, but I do know that the media of this country and every journalist that I know is an advocate of free speech rights and the rights of journalists to report and hold power to account. So I don't think anybody would be against releasing Assange or dropping the charges against him.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move on to trust. We've got a question here from Kath Gilmore. And she says, at least as of 2022, Finland media was highly trusted, 75% in the annual Reuters Institute report. She says, I understand they also have a high level of journalists per capita. We're obviously going against that tide, as are many other countries. Are there any other lessons that you know of that we could learn from the Finns?
I would say it's a very different culture, for one thing. Despite, I won't comment, I'll leave Gavin to comment on the media aspect, but there would be trust for different reasons. We're talking about a much more diverse society here in New Zealand. And, that's part of a cultural trust or lack thereof that seems to be growing. As far as the number of reporters, I'll leave that part of the question to Gavin.
Yeah, I think it is a different society, but there is I think a measure of respect for the role of journalism in Finland that may not be replicated here. Interestingly, the co-author of the JMAD Trust report from AUT, Miriam Ulalati, is Finnish. So she brings to that study an understanding of her homeland's attitudes to media as well. But I think the other thing that you need to be mindful of is that Finland sits on the doorstep of an increasingly aggressive giant, and that has the effect of I think creating and consolidating national solidarity.
That's such an important question when we think about cohesion and our decision making and what leads a society to be more cohesive. Sometimes it is an external threat. And, rather than fighting amongst ourselves, we've got to consolidate against, something from the outside, which is a really good point about Finland. And we're sitting down here in the South Pacific being a bit complacent about some things like that and influences that are coming from overseas, including disinformation campaigns that are, that we're not immune to. So I think, yeah, do you have any further, I think we need to probably summarize pretty soon, but as far as the information ecosystem more broadly and where New Zealand fits in there and what that's doing for our levels of trust here.
I think that when you mentioned the word complacency, I think that is a key factor. I don't think we talk enough about the importance of journalism, and this is a role for our own media. They don't talk enough about themselves. They're always ready to talk about other people, but I think that we need to have our media engaging in a direct conversation with the public. And remember, a conversation is a two-way thing, not talking at the public, but engaging with the public on what they do, how they do it, why it's important, and importantly, how they can do it better. Now, I received a letter this morning from a journalist who says that we don't compare ourselves enough to overseas exemplars, those who do it better than us. And I think he's right. We should be measuring against the best in the world. And I'm not sure we're doing that yet. And we need to do that. And we're capable of doing that.
There is a comment about young people having just moved completely away, avoiding news, or only getting what news they do get through social media. And I know from personal experience with my own young adult children that they do not trust the media generally. They've got this in their head that media is biased and that they can find the sources for themselves. What hope do we have, and how do we start bringing young people back into understanding? I mean, is this an education piece that we need to start a bit earlier? But have we lost a generation to social media that we're not going to get back to listening to democratically significant journalism?
I hope you're wrong. I hope they're not a lost generation, but I am absolutely certain that we absolutely must improve our media literacy teaching in schools and in universities. I think that we have done a very poor job at school in teaching people the importance of journalism and why they can and should trust it. Okay, everybody needs to have an element of skepticism, an element of questioning, and that's healthy. But there's a big difference between that and saying, nah, I'm not going to engage with journalism or the news at all, and I'm going to believe the people who sit in their underwear tapping disinformation into social media. It doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jim comments that a recent piece in Newsroom spoke of the importance of the breakdown in the advertising model, which of course we do get into in the report, rather than journalism itself as the more crucial factor in changes. Have you considered that? Well, yes, maybe we need to elaborate a bit on, I mean, that's sort of the financial model that's part of that storm that has gone on. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have one without the other. You don't have the advertising without the input of journalists, certainly in newspapers and in large parts of the most valuable time slots on radio and television. So you can't separate the advertising market from the journalism. One is a consequence of the other. Advertising is there because the journalism is there.
Mm.
Except it's being pulled away increasingly by the platforms who are taking advantage of the journalism without paying for it.
Yeah, I was just sort of thinking in terms of mainstream media, what is the role of the public in this space, and how do sort of citizens or the public get involved in reinforcing the importance of journalism?
Well, I think that they need to make their voices heard. Now, the best way of that happening is through the media themselves, and the media need to open themselves to that dialogue and that discourse. Now, we have organisations like Better Public Media, Peter Thompson's organisation, which does a very, very good job in advocating on behalf of the public for improvements in journalism and the media. So organisations like that have a role to play, and membership in organisations like that are very, very useful. But I want to see direct engagement between the public and the media. Now, the media have got to come to that party.
Mm.
If they don't, why not?
You also mentioned, in terms of the media coming to the party, sort of recommendations for editorial practices, or how do we go about improving journalistic transparency? Do you have some ideas for that?
Well, I think, and we see it in small measure here, but in larger measure in papers like the New York Times and on their website, where they talk about how they do stories, why they do stories certain ways, and the issues and challenges that were presented by a story. And they talk about ethics a lot more. In America, they talk a lot more about ethics than we do here. So again, it comes back to the willingness of the media to open themselves up to scrutiny. And they can do it. They can do it very, very easily. Pardon me. But they have to make that first move. They've got to say, we are doing this and this is why we're doing it. And also start telling people why they're important. Don't hide their light under a bushel.
That probably flows in terms of, we've got a question here from Zomina Smith, and she's saying she's interested in your thoughts around AI, and I know that you do cover this in the paper. And she says, while it has shown promise in some examples, there are also instances where she thinks its use has eroded trust, such as outlets publishing AI-generated content with errors and plagiarism. She said, as far as she can see, there's very few public-facing policies or guidelines for news organisations around how they use AI. Is it time for New Zealand news outlets to proactively establish clear policies and guidelines to govern the use of AI in journalism?
I think that's already happening. I'm sure that Stuff have done work on that, and maybe NZME as well. of course, it's a dynamic environment. It's also two very, very different faces of the same coin. On the one hand, you have beneficial uses of AI. On the other hand, you have malevolent uses of AI. I think that they need standards for their own beneficial use of AI, and they will conform to high standards on that. The real difficulty with AI is the other side of the coin, and the ability of media to play their vital role in disabusing people of disinformation, highly sophisticated disinformation. It's now at the point with deepfake videos where the level that they need to go to for debunking it is variations in the skin tone of the forehead created by heartbeats. In audio, a few seconds of audio can be turned into a 40-minute speech that you never made. There they have to interrogate the background noises to try to determine whether it's real or fake. Now, those sort of levels of interrogation are frightening, So on the one hand, we've got a media that can stand as the trusted source. On the other hand, it has to find ways of debunking falsehoods, but it's becoming increasingly difficult and expensive to do so.
Yeah, we have a comment from Jim saying AI is appallingly illiterate. And you could agree with that in some cases at the moment, but it is getting better. And considering that we have such a low level of trust in some of the media, that people are willing to be led down false paths, and AI is only going to make it worse. So we do need to really be trying to get on top of that part of it. And I think first is even to reestablish trust in real sources of information. So as I said, work is cut out for us, but and it's going to take a collective effort of all of the players actually cooperating on this perfect storm problem.
Don't underestimate it. I have a friend who's a retired Anglican minister, and she asked me to use ChatGPT to write an Anglican sermon on the benefits of protest. About 30 seconds later, it came back with a perfectly plausible sermon with Anglican references. So don't underestimate it.
Mm.
It's not as dumb as you think.
No.
I think we've got time for one more question, and then I'm going to ask Anne and then Gavin to sum up. So the last question here is from Penny, and she says, sometimes it seems that media are their own worst enemies, contracting arts and books media, when listeners and readers of the genre are the very demographic groups who would pay to buy this sort of content. She's interested to hear from you guys in terms of on this apparent irony.
Not quite sure what you said. Can you repeat that again?
So I think what Penny's saying is that you've got arts and book media, which is contracting from her perspective.
Oh, shrinking, you mean?
Shrinking, yep. So
I'm sorry, I was thinking
arts,
contracting as in contracted out.
Oh, no, contracting. So yeah, shrinking arts and books media.
Yeah.
And when the listeners and readers of this genre, the very demographic group who would probably pay likely for more content. So she's interested to hear whether you feel like the media are their own worst enemies on that perspective.
Look, I think that the shrinkage in areas like that may well be a reflection of reduced resources. Their features departments or the like are under so much pressure and even organising reviews and sending out books and music and so on is really time consuming, more time consuming than you think. And I think it may not be a matter of not wanting to do it, but just having to reset their priorities, and some things had to go because they have far fewer resources than they used to have. But the consequence cultural consequence is very real. So again, got to find ways of bringing that back. It's not just what we might lose in the future. It's what we've already lost that we need to try to recover.
We do have one more question that I am going to answer. I am going to ask you both here. It's from Asif Quasi, and he says, when it comes to objective journalism, how much of a problem is the fact that the overwhelming majority of journalists in New Zealand identify as politically left? Is this a problem, and how much of a factor do you think this is in declining trust in media from the wider population?
How does he know that? I never ever identified as left or right. Nobody knows how I voted. I have a friend, a former journalist now, who, when he arrived in the press gallery, and from that day on, he never voted because he was determined to be neutral. That's an assumption. And it's an assumption that I do not think is very real. I think it helped, it's the sort of, what it says is that, if you disagree with the political point of view of a journalist, then you put them in a corner opposite to yourself. So I think it's a reflection of that. I don't think it's true that journalists are all left-leaning at all. Like they are the reflection of society itself. They come from all parts of the political spectrum.
I do think there is a narrative, though, that from some sides that would suggest that the New Zealand media is left-leaning. I would agree with you, Gavin, that's not necessarily the case, but I do know that that narrative exists, and these narratives are part of what drives trust or mistrust in the media. So where do you get on top of those things, and how do you shift that?
Yeah, look, I think obviously the way to overcome it is to be demonstrably independent.
Yeah,
right. They're no good. We can go and get.
that's mute. Sorry.
Thanks for doing that, Anne. Okay, well, I'm just conscious of time now. So, Anne, I'm just going to turn to you both and ask you both to sort of summarise. We've heard today that this is a very complex problem, and it needs a systemic approach to dealing with it. Would you like to sum up first, Anne, and then I'll hand over to Gavin?
Well, as Gavin said, this isn't about tinkering. We do, and you've just mentioned it's a big problem, and we need a cohesive approach to it to create those necessary conditions for media viability, and that includes not just financial or technological, but socio-political conditions that can move this dial, and that means an enabling technical environment, and also mechanisms that would ensure that there is sufficient media pluralism and diversity that allows the public an opportunity to access a wide variety of reliable journalism, including local news and in local languages, like our mention of news deserts that we need to consider.
Yeah. I'd endorse what Anne says. And perhaps end with a plea. The journalism that we're talking about is too important for individuals or individual organisations or political parties to go it alone on this. We must have a unified effort where people put aside their differences, put aside competitive aspirations and so on, to address something that is so important and so much bigger than one individual or one individual organisation, that we've got to collectively find the ways forward to sustain that all-important journalism in, as Anne says, as pluralistic an environment as we can possibly make.
Thank you.
Thank you both, and thank you everyone for joining us today.